All right, thank you everybody. Welcome to this. This is EVs for Everyone, a National Drive Electric Week panel conversation. As noted, please, if you can stay muted to reduce background noise, that would be helpful. And we are, if you are on video, visible to other people. So I just want to make you aware of that. If you do not want to be visible, you can click the little stop video icon at the bottom of your screen and we will just see your name. So totally your choice there. Each panelist that we have here is going to present for a few minutes, and then we will have questions from our moderator, Curt, and from all of you. So what I would ask you to do is to put your questions in the chat box anytime they occur to you. Feel free to go ahead and do that whenever they come up, and I will read them back when we get to the question and answer part of the event today. So I am Laura McMillan. I'm the Director of Communications here at Save the Sound. Save the Sound, for those who aren't already familiar, leads environmental action across the whole Long Island Sound region, including all across Connecticut. We fight climate change, protect the Sound and its rivers. We save endangered lands and work with nature to restore ecosystems. And part of what makes us really unique among nonprofits in our region is the breadth of our toolkit and of our results. So we use legislative advocacy and legal action and engineering and on the ground environmental monitoring, and we work closely with volunteers. And with all of that together, for over 40 years now, we've been really ensuring that people and wildlife alike across our region can enjoy a healthy, clean, thriving environment that we all deserve. You can learn more about us at savethesound.org. And we are very, very happy to have you here today. So we do have 5 great presenters today. I'm going to run through their biographies and introductions for you real quick. They are all extraordinarily accomplished people, so I have abbreviated some of their biographies as much as possible, but I will speed through them. First up, we will have Curt Johnson, who is president of the Save the Sound. He holds a JD from UConn School of Law, as well as a master's in environmental law from Vermont Law School. He has been with Save the Sound since 1993 and has helped lead the team in protecting air, lands, and water, bringing together people, other organizations, and our elected officials to make those changes. He also co-founded the Environmental Law Clinic at UConn and has served as the co-chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee to the Long Island Sound Study and president of the Hampton Land Conservation Trust. Next, we have Lakiesha Christopher, who is supervising environmental analyst with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. She has been with DEEP's Air Bureau for 18 years and with the Mobile Sources Group in the Planning Division for 4 years, mobile sources meaning things like cars and trucks. She's responsible for the Air Bureau's grant and incentive program, such as the Volkswagen Diesel Emissions Mitigation Program, the State ERA program, and the Cheaper Incentive Program, which is the Electric Vehicle Incentive Program. Next up, we will have Bryan Garcia, who is president and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank, which is the United States' first state-level green bank. He co-chairs the U.S. Department of Energy's Financing Solutions Work Group for the State Energy Efficiency Action Network, and is also on the board of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, Sustainable Connecticut, Center for Sustainable Energy, and advisory boards for the UConn School of Engineering and the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. And he holds degrees in, among other things, economics, public administration, finances, natural resources from Berkeley, NYU, and Yale. So busiest man on earth, as far as I can tell. We will then have joining us Kevin Miller, who is the Director of Public Policy for ChargePoint, which is the world's largest network of electric vehicle charging stations. And he works with all the branches of government and regulation to implement policies that increase access to electrified transportation for people. Before coming to ChargePoint, he was CFO at the Chief Executive Office for Energy and Environmental Affairs, and has served many other roles besides. He has a political science and public policies degrees, and brings to us today a great perspective from the private sector as well as advocacy. Larry Thompson is a member and volunteer of the Electric Vehicle Club of Connecticut, which some of you might know as the Westport Electric Car Club, and Sierra Club, and Save the Sound. He describes himself as an electric vehicle evangelist. Today's panel was Larry's idea, so we thank him very much for his hard work pulling together a great event and communications all this week for National Drive Electric Week. So I will turn it over now to Curt for the meat of today's exciting event. All yours, Curt.
All right, well, it's great to be here. Thank you all for participating. I am going to try to start the slideshow. Here we go from the beginning. So you heard some information just about Save the Sound. We are sort of the action people for the environment in your region. So please check us out on the website and join us if you can. I am going to be talking today a little bit about personal experience and the need for electric vehicles. You know, in brief, electric vehicles are such a key part of our future for climate because they have the potential to be absorbing energy from a renewable network, which our governor has established that we must establish over the next 15 years or so. And the vision is that we would be creating tremendous amounts of renewable energy, largely offshore, but from solar, et cetera, from houses where we can. And then these vehicles would be absorbing that and using it. And the advantages is that at night, they'd be absorbing the energy and then we'd be driving during the day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are some of the barriers and blast through a couple of myths. This is the results of a recent survey that was done by a car group, an auto sales group, as to the biggest reasons why people in the United States would not buy an all-electric vehicle. One is the concern about range on a single charge, but just as importantly is that they're just too expensive to buy and no place to charge. So those are the two that I'm going to be focusing on from a used electric vehicle point of view. And I hope at the end of the presentation, you'll agree that they are our best available bargain. Let's see, next slide. So I'm just going to start with the fact that I took a look at Carfax this morning, and this is some of the results that came out. What you see here is a 2015 Nissan Leaf that has 15,000 miles on it. It was just sold, but the selling price was $9,000. That's just an incredible bargain for a vehicle with 15,000 miles on it. This vehicle has an 84-mile range. And, you know, let's just take a moment now to compare it to some other vehicles that are out there. The main point I want to make is that right now, here in the Northeast, used electric vehicles are the best bargain for the dollar that you can find, which is tremendously good news for working families. It's tremendously good news for anyone who's thinking about getting a second car or a third car for their kids. You know, it is tremendously good news for low and moderate income people. This happens to be a favorite. We bought a smart car about 2 years ago. It's the least expensive, most affordable vehicle on the EV range. This one happens to be 19,000 miles of 2016. with 68 miles of range for $8,500. It is just so unusual to be able to find a vehicle with this kind of mileage. I'll also just add that our experience has been that these vehicles have virtually no maintenance. The electric engine, you're not talking about changing oil. There's just so many fewer moving parts. These vehicles are, in my opinion, much more reliable than a gasoline vehicle. And with a low mileage vehicle like this, they're incredibly a bargain. Now, just for comparison, today I was looking at, a 2018, or I should say Honda Civic. So this was the best bargain I could come up with, which is $12,000 basically for something with twice as much miles, 33,000 miles. That's 2,900 or almost 3,000 more than the Nissan Leaf, $3,500 more than the smart car. So I think when you start looking on the web at these vehicles, you will conclude that the first generation vehicles, admittedly having a relatively low mileage range, are the best bargain out there of any vehicle available right now. And that really does blow through the myth of expense for used vehicles. As you can kind of tell, I'm into bargains, and that's one of the prime reasons why I bought the smart car to begin with. And finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about charging. My experience has been, and I know it's true of the Leaf as well, one can charge these vehicles with a 120 outlet, just the common outlet that you have in your house right now, or anyone has in their house right now. I will also tell you that for one summer, we charged our vehicle with an extension cord, a heavy-duty extension cord, charged our smart car with that. It's not advised, I'll say that right away, not advised by the 1 minute. Is that the deal, Leah? Okay. Not advised by the manufacturer, but we had absolutely no problem with it. It's a way of saying that for people who are a little bit creative and willing to take maybe a very, very small chance, all that you would need, even if you're in an apartment building without a external place to charge, is a very short, heavy-duty electric extension cord. And our experience is that it creates no problem at all in terms of the recharge. So this sort of ties into what Bryan's going to be talking about, that I would argue for low and moderate income people, these are now accessible. They are the least expensive, and I'm super interested in hearing from Lakiesha and Bryan about the incentives for used vehicles, which would bring these prices down even more, an absolute bargain of this century. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak briefly on Connecticut's efforts to advance EV deployment while trying to ensure that they're available for everyone. As with all of the Air Bureau's efforts, our primary focus is to address Connecticut air quality problems. We're currently non-attainment for ozone all across the state, and the mobile source sector is the biggest contributor of NOx emissions, which is a precursor to ozone. Mobile sources are also the largest contributor to the state's GHG emissions. Recognizing that Connecticut has to accelerate its transition toward a modern, clean transportation system, we have and are implementing a host of programs, policies, and legislations. A lot of them are listed here, at least mobile source focused programs. But today, I want to focus on our efforts in the electric vehicle sector. So currently in Connecticut, we have, as of July 1st, a little over 12,600 EVs registered in Connecticut. 4,100 of those were newly registered in 2019. But that is still very far from the light duty goals that we have of 125 to 150 EVs on the road by 2025. And our heavy duty electric goals of 30% of heavy duty sales by 2030 needs to be zero emission vehicles. Some of the programs or initiatives that we think will help us get to the point that we're trying to get to in Connecticut is the EV roadmap, our EV incentive programs like Cheaper, and utilizing our VW EVSE funding to deploy charging infrastructure across the state. So the EV roadmap, it was released in April of this year, and it outlines our vehicle electrification strategies for achieving our GHG reduction and our ZEV MOU target. It explores EV deployment, charging infrastructure, and refueling deployment. And because we know EVs should be and are for everyone, it also explores how best to aid successful EV and infrastructure deployment in LMI communities. Some of the considerations and recommendations in the roadmap include understanding and setting minimum requirements for EVSE investment in LMI communities, understanding that the best model for EVSE rollout in LMI communities may require electric distribution companies to own and operate the infrastructure because private investment may not be forthcoming in those communities. Recognizing that the focus should not solely be on EV ownership, but that we should seek to electrify all modes of transportation to ensure that clean air benefits are realized in LMI communities. It's important to remember that whatever strategy that we do determine is ultimately the best moving forward in LMI communities, that determination should be arrived at with full participation of the members of the affected community. Following up on the EV roadmap and as a part of the PURA ZEV or the PURA grid monetization docket, PURA put out a solicitation in May of this year looking for program design proposals for building out Connecticut's charging network. They received 16 proposals, which included proposals from Eversource and UI. The proposals outlined projects that would incentivize EV charging deployment through various methods, such as a make-ready program to build out the infrastructure behind the meter, and an LMI study to determine the best rollout of infrastructure in those communities. My slides just, okay. Another avenue that we have looked at or have been utilizing is, oh, well, I'm sorry, before I go to VW, I should tell you that the next step in PURA's process is to put out an actionable proposal that combines aspects of the different proposals they received as a guide to what they're looking for a make-ready program and for the LMI study effort. And they're expecting to put that out sometime later this year. VW, so we received I'm sure everyone is familiar by now with the Volkswagen settlement that was for approximately $3 billion. And a portion of that was to
1 minute, Lakiesha.
Okay. Portion of that is to fund NOx mitigation programs, which can be rolled out over the next 10 years. We propose to accelerate, 8.4 million of that 55.7 million that Connecticut received can be used for infrastructure build out. The state's plan for utilizing the funds that we received from VW are outlined in our mitigation plan, which is accessible on the department's webpage. To date, we have awarded 18.5 million in funding for vehicle replacement projects, and approximately 7.5 million of that amount has gone to electric projects. We're anticipating a third round of funding soon, along with a funding round for EVSE projects. And the trust allows us, with our EVSE funds, to fund level 1, level 2, and fast charging stations at public destinations or public areas, workplaces, and at multi-unit dwellings. Last but not least is cheaper. The cheaper program is a point of sale rebate offered for the purchase of plug-in electric and fuel cell electric vehicles. The program started in 2015 as a pilot and has provided approximately 11 million in rebates for roughly 6,000 vehicles. Last year, the legislature institutionalized the program and provided $3 million per year for 6 years. The legislature also established a board to oversee the program, and the program is being broadened to accommodate used electric vehicles. DEEP recently put out the proposed rebate structure under the new program to get residents' input. The proposed structures include an LMI supplement on the base vehicle rebate for new vehicles, and a used vehicle rebate, which is only available to LMI applicants. We received quite a number of comments, and those comments were provided to the board, and they will ultimately decide what rebate structure the program moves forward with. And that's all I have. Unfortunately, I'll have to jump off the call before the question and answer section or segment. So I provided my email address here in case anyone has any follow-up question. Feel free to send me an email. And pretty soon I'll figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Thank you, Lakiesha. And Bryan, I think you are up next.
Excellent. If you can get my slides loaded, that would be great. Great presentation, Lakiesha. Look like Curt, you might have missed that photo there at the end. So the presentation I wanted to give really is, I think, trying to understand, get our arms around the challenges of transportation burden, the percentage of household income spent on transportation, with a desire to understand how we can enable more low to moderate income families to participate in the green economy, specifically around purchasing electric vehicles and reducing transportation burden. So yeah, why don't we just quickly go on to slide 2. You know, many of you on the line already know, for the most part, who the Green Bank is. So just a couple of things I want to point out. So our mission is to confront climate change front and center. The second thing I want to say in terms of a goal is that we strive to make the benefits of the green economy inclusive and accessible to all individuals, which is to say that we have a strong focus on ensuring that vulnerable communities have access to the clean economy, and the green economy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. Let's go ahead and go to slide 3. So let me jump a little bit into understanding what's called the affordability gap, which is essentially things that we pay that are a percentage of our household income. So let me start from the bottom. So if we're spending less than 30% of our household income on housing, then that's considered affordable. Energy is comprised of 20% of that household burden. So it's 6%. If you're spending more than 6% of your household income on energy, then you're spending too much. Energy is unaffordable. Transportation, we're working on a study now. It's forthcoming in the next month in November, which is looking at transportation burden, and anything spent over 15% of household income on transportation, all the costs from fuel to the vehicle to the costs, ownership, maintenance, you are spending more, and transportation is unaffordable. So just kind of diving a little bit into an example of a family in East Hartford, you can see here that their affordability level in terms of household income would be $14,000. That's 45% of their household income spent on these three areas. But we've actually got actual average data in terms of what households are spending on these areas. And you can see that they're $7,000 of spending above their affordability needs. We're going to dive into energy in a second, but transportation you can see is a significant burden in terms of household income in Connecticut. Let's go to the next slide. So this is an interesting slide, and again, this is kind of new data, so we're figuring out ways of presenting it. But it looks at household income. So you see, based on area median income, so less than 60%, all the way up to greater than 120% of the area median income. These are wealthier individuals versus low individuals, low and moderate income, which is less than 80% of area median income. You can see how much more low to moderate income families are spending on transportation, housing, and energy. Their total burden is the dot there. We want to bring them down to 45% of their household income as being affordable. Some of you may kind of recognize this slide in terms of a graphic. Many of you may have seen the graphic that shows the definition of equity versus equality. This is kind of a way of depicting that in a visual on the data that's actually happening here in Connecticut. So by reducing these burdens on low to moderate income families, what we're effectively doing is helping to increase wealth for those families. So we want to catalyze more investment in vulnerable communities so that they can reduce these burdens and increase the wealth of their families. Let's go to the next slide. So on transportation burden, just a couple of quick takeaways, and maybe these are opportunities for EVs for all. Transportation, as you just saw, is the second highest household expenditure. It is crippling to low to moderate income families. They're spending a significant amount of their income on transportation. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the lowest earning 20% of the population spent nearly 30% of their household income on transportation. Think about that number. That's a huge number versus less than 10% for the highest earning 20% of the population. So this is the disparity that we're dealing with in terms of addressing transportation burden. And in Connecticut, 3/4 of the state census tracts have an average transportation burden above 15%. So unaffordable transportation in Connecticut. Let's go to the next slide. We know on the energy side that we can do it. We can reduce energy burden, specifically through solar PV and energy efficiency. So we're talking about EVs for all today, but solar for all is around us. We've targeted vulnerable communities with solar PV and energy efficiency. That's our offer. We come in and working with a company called Posigen, provide a solar lease to vulnerable households that live in vulnerable communities. We also weatherize their homes by supporting the Home Energy Solutions Program, and we provide additional energy efficiency measures in those homes to further shore up those savings. The savings from solar on average is about $690 per year in avoided energy costs. So right there, you're reducing energy affordability by nearly $700. And in terms of weatherization and energy efficiency, we're delivering another $600 in terms of energy efficiency savings from those two sources. So we can actually deliver to low to moderate income families $1,200 to $1,300 more energy affordability by deploying clean energy. So this is important, right? Because we all think that clean energy is more expensive, to Curt's point. In this context, we've used a financing innovation to provide solar that's lowering the cost of energy for our most vulnerable citizens. Let's go to the next slide. So just in terms of a couple of various programs, we heard from Lakiesha. Next slide here. We heard from Lakiesha on the cheaper incentive.
One more minute.
No problem. I'll just keep going. Lakiesha provided a great overview of the cheaper program. Some of the things we've been working on, I would kind of categorize the things we've been working on as kind of testing things, trying to see where we can push a button and see where we can get the most bang for the buck. So we currently, with DEEP, we're using some remaining stimulus funds to provide interest rate buy-downs for homeowners who want to install rechargers in their homes. We've also got buy-downs for battery storage and renewable heating and cooling. Those are kind of the three climate change wedges in Connecticut that are really important to hit, because there are three leading wedges. So through local community banks and credit unions, you can get access to really low interest loans. One of the things we've been working on is establishing a voluntary carbon standard for EV charging stations. So we actually work with Electrify America, EVgo, Exelon, Siemens, and the Carbon Neutral Alliance to develop a voluntary standard for carbon offsets. So, for example, if you are recharging your car in Washington State versus, say, Wyoming, the emissions from that vehicle are completely different, because in Washington State, you virtually have zero emissions from the grid because you've got lots of hydropower and wind power, versus in Wyoming, where you are using predominantly coal against gasoline. So you actually have negative carbon. You're contributing more carbon than you would have if you were driving an internal combustion engine vehicle. So we've developed a voluntary carbon standard with these organizations, and we're going to be selling voluntary carbon offsets into the market, raising revenues, and then deploying and investing those revenues in building out more of the recharging infrastructure, with a focus here in Connecticut on low to moderate income census tracts. And then lastly, on CPACE, Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, we've got a program where we're encouraging commercial building owners to do more efficiency measures, and for doing that, we'll provide them with free EV recharging stations. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll just quickly wrap up on these two slides. Go ahead and hit the button once more. This article just came out yesterday, so on the national infrastructure debate, you may have seen the Democrats pass in the House the $1.5 trillion stimulus bill, which was really about the modernization and decarbonization of the nation's infrastructure. A component of that bill was the creation of the National Climate Bank, modeled after the Connecticut Green Bank, a $20 billion green bank, but the emphasis being on ensuring that more private investment is going into vulnerable communities. This policy not only passed the House, but it also had bipartisan support in the House in a specific bill on the National Climate Bank. So we're generating more political support across the aisle because we are enabling more private investment in clean energy. And then one last slide, the next slide here, is just kind of a takeaway on our new vision statement. So we have a vision of a world empowered by the renewable energy community, which translates into a planet protected by the love of humanity. So if we are going to confront these environmental problems, we need to be able to help our fellow citizens. So focusing on vulnerable communities has become front and center, a priority of the Green Bank, and we live by this green bonds us mantra. In our world of finance, green bonds are a way of raising money, generating capital so that we can finance projects. Green bonds us, we sell these bonds across the country. We issued, you can kind of see over my shoulder here, a Green Liberty Bond poster. We issued small denomination bonds in honor of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this year. We sold them at $1,000 denominations to citizens across the country, even including here in Connecticut. So green bonds are an instrument, a financial instrument to generate revenues that allow us to do more investing, but it also plays a different part. Green bonds us. The environment brings us together. It is a foundational issue, we believe, that can bring humanity together and better our society. So that is what we are focused on. And our tool is through the use of finance to create a better society. So let me leave it there. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Kevin, you want to pull up your slides? And take yourself off mute whenever you have a chance.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Really appreciate everyone's great presentations thus far. Kevin Miller, Director of Public Policy with ChargePoint. I will try and speed through these. Apologies if I speak too quickly. Just want to try and get through some of the content. I'll try and focus on some of the issues that I think are important for folks to think about from an infrastructure perspective, when what we're trying to do is ensure that we have equitable access to electric vehicle charging infrastructure in Connecticut. So just first, a little background on ChargePoint. We're the largest network of electric vehicle charging stations. We've got over 115,000 spots throughout our network, thousands of which are in Connecticut. And by and large, we don't own and operate any of those stations. So I'll briefly explain our business model and say why it's important to think about some of these models for operation when we want to make sure that we're lowering the barriers to deploying infrastructure where it needs to be so that we can get more vehicles individually operated and operated by fleets to transition to electric drive. So ChargePoint, we provide a free app that guides drivers to charging spots on our network. And we sell charging solutions to various entities, from individual drivers who might want a charger at their home. You can order it off of Amazon, or for commercial entities or public entities that have vehicle fleets. And we also partner with utilities to make sure that all of the charging that takes place is taking place in a manner that benefits the grid, as well as make sure that you can get from point A to point B as well as you need to. So we have a full range of equipment. There's a different kind of charging solution that you need for every job. On the far left of the screen here, we've got our home charger. That's a tool that 60 to 70% of all charging can take place at home. There are important needs for higher power charging in the public and for fleets, but no one is going to need to have a high power direct current fast charger at home. But again, no one tool for all the jobs. I think it's really important when we think about equitable access to clean transportation to think not just about how do we make sure that the individual vehicles that folks have access to are as clean as possible, but how are we also thinking about shared transportation? I'm based out of New York City. I am lucky enough to not have access to a vehicle. I can rely on public transit. That means it's that much more important to think about, dense urban environments where folks may not have their own vehicles, to think about, well, what are the types of fleets that are in our communities? Is it ones that are giving access to transportation? Is it the heavy duty vehicles like garbage trucks and street sweepers, things that are really heavy emitters? How do we start to really target those operations as well? And also looking to goods delivery in general as well for all types of fleet operations. I'm not going to read off all the different models for providing charging services, but what I want to stick is that there isn't one single reason why folks offer charging. People aren't making money off of the sale of an electron. They're providing an amenity, or they're supporting their existing fleet operations. So this can bolster folks' reason to deploy charging infrastructure. 90% of charging taking place at home and at work. A lot of fleet opportunities taking place. Thinking about what are the incentives in place and how do we lower those from different perspectives. And then I won't go into too many charts and graphs, but when we're thinking about how do we make sure that there's equitable access to the benefits of clean transportation, also thinking about some of the equitable access to the cost benefits. I think, there was an interesting graph that was just presented thinking about what's the transportation burden versus what's the energy burden. There's a net benefit that can be experienced by all electricity ratepayers by having more charging take place at times that benefit the grid, and different types of charging take place at different times a day. So it's a complex issue. We're glad to be participating in the process at Pura, and just to flag that it can be complicated. Two things I want to really focus on here are, we don't need to only focus on how do we get more stations installed. Getting equitable access to charging doesn't just mean installing chargers on every corner. It really means how do we lower barriers for that deployment in a manner that addresses those upfront capital costs, as well as the long-term operating costs. And that's going to be key to thinking about the benefit of the entire transportation ecosystem, as well as reducing net emissions across the board from the transportation sector. So apologies in advance for leaning on New York cost assumptions. I had just pulled these together somewhat recently for a proceeding in New York. I just wanted to highlight here that for a level 2 charging station in a commercial environment, most level 2 chargers can plug into a 240 volt dryer plug. Right, so you're not going to have huge installation cost challenges here. But when you're thinking about a commercially available or a municipally available charging station, it costs more to install one of those than it does to buy it. Right, so the installation costs can vary significantly from a dense urban environment to outside of a dense urban environment. So thinking about how do we focus on solutions that are going to lower that retrofit cost or potentially avoid it moving forward. What are the things that we're actually trying to solve for? Is it the equipment or is it the installation, the parts, the labor, trenching, digging into concrete? When folks think about DC fast charging, they think, I want to get a gas station experience. It'll be easy. We'll just install fast, high-powered chargers everywhere. I'm happy to share this subsequently, but I think it's just important to think about the scale of the challenge when you look at the upfront capital costs. A lot of these types of costs won't be significantly reduced over time. The equipment itself, highlighted in blue for DC fast chargers, I've bucketed these between 2 50 kilowatt chargers, what you typically see now, and
One
two.
moment.
All right. So all that is to say, there are significant costs here, but those can be overcome through some interesting programs that we've talked about. The other thing that I want to leave y'all with is that we have to look at the way that electricity rates are structured. Because if we can't get our fleet operators, particularly our public fleet, transit agencies, or municipal vehicle fleet operators, private fleet operators, if they can't afford to operate the stations because of the way commercial and industrial rates are structured, they're not going to make that decision. So having forums like the ones that are taking place at the PURA are really important. And the final takeaways here, again, capital costs are something to consider. How do we make sure that we're making our existing infrastructure investments ready for the transportation needs of the future? How about we look at that during the time of construction? What type of construction codes requirements do we have? And then on the operating cost side, there are some really novel nation-leading solutions that Connecticut has in place. Eversource Energy has a forward-thinking electricity rate that makes it easier and predictable for operators of fast chargers if they're providing publicly accessible charging. But we don't have a similar solution for heavy-duty fleet vehicle users, which don't typically charge in public. So thinking about how we solve these problems, how we make the solutions a little bit more predictable, makes it easier to have light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles electrify in a manner that creates equitable access for everyone in Connecticut.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin, very much. Larry, you are up next.
Great, thank you. And if you would go to my slides, that would be terrific. So I'll start by saying thanks everyone for attending today. Very much appreciate the time you're putting in here. And of course, thanks to Laura and Leah and all the presenters and panelists. So today I just want to talk about just a few things that I think every electric vehicle owner, prospective or otherwise, would benefit from. Next chart, please. That's a Ford Focus, by the way, that picture on the right. But yeah, next chart. So we've discussed this before today. Battery electric vehicles produce no tailpipe emissions. There's no tailpipe, there's no exhaust systems, there's no internal combustion engines. And as a result, there's no carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide coming out of a battery electric vehicle. Plug-in hybrids, we'll talk about that in a moment, they do produce more emissions than a battery electric vehicle, but certainly less than internal combustion engine cars. So battery electric vehicles only have a battery and motors. There's no internal combustion engine in the thing at all, as Curt mentioned. Plug-in hybrids have a battery and a motor, but they also have an internal combustion engine to help move the car when the energy isn't available to the motors. So the advantage to plug-in hybrids is you don't have range anxiety. You know, if your battery runs low, you can drive up to the gas station and away you go. And it's, you know, maybe goes without saying that the greenhouse gases that internal combustion engines produce are a real health hazard, particularly in some parts of Connecticut. The New Haven I-95 corridor, for example, has been called out, and they do contribute to global warming. Next chart, please. And you'll notice at the bottom of some of these slides, I have a link to, next chart, please. I have a link to where you can learn more about this. Here you go. The question came up about charging your electric vehicle. I get this question all the time. As Curt said, you can just plug your electric vehicle into your household outlet. Most homes have a 110 outlet on the exterior of the house. You can just plug it right in. Works great. It charges a little bit slow, and the charging rates vary depending on the car and the technology, but generally speaking, it'll charge somewhere around 4 or 5 miles of charge per hour that's connected. However, in the cold weather, some of that electricity has to go to keep the battery warm while it's charging, and as a result, you may not get much charge at all. Charging on a 220 volt, which is essentially the same as what your clothes dryer is plugged into, that's much more effective. You'll get something on the order of 20 to 25 miles of charge, and that's referred to as level 2 charging. And again, these will vary depending on the amperage of the circuits and so forth. If you decide to buy an electric car, you'll probably want to get a 220 volt circuit installed, and that will generally require an electrician, a licensed electrician, to do that work. The cost can range from just a few $100s if the circuit's already there or it's close to where it needs to be, up to several $1,000s if that circuit needs to be run, for instance, from a house to a detached garage and you got to start digging up the lawn and, you know, those kinds of things, right? It's important to note that some of the public utilities in Connecticut have off-peak rates. So my off-peak rate where I am is about 13 cents a kilowatt hour, whereas the peak rate is about 26 cents. So we plug our car in at night, let it charge on the off-peak rates. However, as we discussed before, many apartment buildings and condominiums, they actually don't have a lot of these charging stations installed. There is legislation that says they must do that for new construction, but it doesn't address what's already in place other than the other legislation we talked about today. So if you're living in an apartment or condominium, you do want to check and make sure that you've got the ability to have access to these systems. Next chart, please. And I think you'll have access to these charts before. I know I'm running through them very quickly. Charging your EV on road, I got to tell you, it's really fast and simple. According to the Department of Energy, we've got 1,037 public charging outlets in Connecticut. There are a number of networks that provide this: Tesla, Electrify America, Blink, EVgo, and ChargePoint. ChargePoint's terrific. ChargePoint's everywhere. If you have an EV, by all means, get their app, because you'll find that ChargePoint has a tendency to be more location helpful. So for instance, when I go, pre-COVID, when I used to go to the gym, they had a ChargePoint system there and I just plug it in, I go to the gym and do my thing, and I'd come out kind of charged up, and both physically in my car. The charging rates on some of the higher end level 2s and level 3s can run from 50 to 400 miles of charge per hour. So if you stop, get yourself a cup of coffee, get back in your car, you're going to have a lot of charge range. You'll see a designation called destination chargers. These are typically chargers installed by a business, a retail location or a hotel, for example. They're typically level 2. To use them, in many cases, you have to be a patron. So you have to be a resident of the hotel or having dinner at the restaurant or so forth. So if you see destination, just, you know, have a look. You can find it on the ChargePoint app actually, and it will tell you the rates and if you need permissions and all that stuff. So it's really easy. The charging stations are everywhere. However, when we talk about 400 miles of charge, batteries charge more slowly the more charged they are. So when I pull up to an EV in New Hampshire, for example, or a charging station in New Hampshire, and I've got 20% range left in my car, I'm getting over 400 miles of charge per hour. When the car's up around 90% charge, it's dropping down to like 50, 60, 70, 80, something in that range. So if you're going to use those and you're on long trips, you just want to give yourself a little bit extra time to accommodate the drop in the charging rate. And also to know that if you're charging for the first time and all of a sudden it went from 400 to 50, that's okay. That's normal. Nothing to get concerned about there.
One more minute, Larry.
Thank you. Next chart, please. Next chart. We talked about the incentives. I'll just say there are also federal incentives, and there's a link at the bottom. Next chart, please. Battery electric vehicles have a lower cost, total lower cost. So electricity is cheap as compared to the cost of gas when you're using an electric car. I think, as Curt mentioned, there's very minimal maintenance requirements on an electric car. It really comes down to tire rotations and brake inspections, which of course you want to do. And a lot of the brakes on EVs go for 100,000 miles or more because of the regenerative braking features. And there's a link down at the bottom. You can see the details on that. I think it was the EV they looked at was 46 cents a mile versus 49 cents a mile for a Toyota Camry. Next chart, please. Real quick, cold weather driving, you will lose range in cold weather. So when it's 30 degrees outside, you could lose up to 25% of your range for battery electric vehicles. Plug-in hybrids don't really have this concern because you've got the gas engine. Also, if you're using your cabin heater, you'll use a significant amount of battery capacity keeping the cabin warm. So manufacturers are doing things to address this, but just be aware, you are going to lose range. And they have a tendency to be really good in ice and snow. Next chart, please. And I'll tell you the last thing, which is really kind of fun. These things are just a lot of fun to drive. The batteries are placed low between the wheels. The center of gravity is low. The weight distribution is evenly distributed amongst the tires. And electric motors provide a lot of acceleration really quietly and very quickly. So yeah, you'll have a great experience, and it'll be a lot of fun driving an electric vehicle. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Larry. So maybe we are nearing the end of our hour. So what we probably will do, and Laura, maybe I'll hand it over to you for a little bit of housekeeping stuff, but we'll stay on the line to answer a few questions. But for those of you who have to drop off, thank you very much. And we will be reaching out with the slideshow for folks to be able to access a lot of that information. So please look for that email coming from us soon. So maybe Laura, if you have anything else on housekeeping before we hand it over to Curt to do a little Q&A.
Yeah, just to reiterate, we are recording and we will be hosting the video of today's presentation on our YouTube channel, as well as sharing it on social media and in a follow-up email, certainly within the next couple of weeks. So if you please look forward to being able to share this presentation with others. Yeah, Curt, I think this is it is perfect time for Q&A right now. If you want to go through the prepared questions, and I'll be folks in the chat. Thank you for posting your questions. I see Bryan and Charles have been answering a few of them as we go along, which is great. I'll be recording the others, and I'll ask Curt those very shortly.
Great, thank you, Laura. First, quick question for folks on the panel, and for Charles too. What are some of the policies that Connecticut needs to establish to ensure that we hit our climate targets? And you saw Lakiesha's presentation of a goal of 125,000 electric vehicles by 2025, which is only 5 years around the corner. So I don't know, Charles or anyone else, if you want to handle that.
Yeah, so thank you. I think Lakiesha did a great job of laying out a lot of the policies that we currently have in place. One policy that is currently being developed and should be ready for the states to adopt relatively soon is the Transportation and Climate Initiative. For folks who may be familiar with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which caps carbon emissions from our electric power sector, TCI would do the same thing for the transportation sector. It would essentially set declining emissions levels for carbon emissions from on-road transportation fuels. And just as the carbon emissions are auctioned off under RGGI, so would allowable emissions under TCI, and would generate significant revenue for Connecticut, hundreds of millions of dollars that can be invested not only in additional clean transportation investments, but a variety of policies that will help to reduce our emissions, particularly focusing on our currently overburdened communities. So it's based upon a model that works well for electric power, and 12 states and the District of Columbia, including Connecticut, are currently putting the final touches on that for ratification by the states.
And just to follow up, Charles, is it likely that Connecticut will be in a position to move forward with this during the next legislative session?
So I can say that the administration is very supportive of the proposal. So we expect the support of the governor to move this forward.
Great, thank you. I have a question. I just want to point out that my neighbor and good friend Hector is on the phone, and he runs a fabulous used car facility in New Haven, and the majority of his clientele are Latino and Latina folks. So Hector, thank you for joining. And it's just sort of related. How important is it to advertise and let people know that if they're looking for a used car, that EVs are a bargain, especially in low and moderate income? Because you saw the graph I shared. Most people have a perception that they are unaffordable. You know, they're great for hyper wealthy people, but not for working people. So it's just an open question.
This is Bryan. I thought the information you showed was completely compelling, right? I think, you know, to the extent we can do a better job promoting the affordability of these vehicles, that would be great. And connecting that affordability to performance, as Larry was laying out, you know, they're just fun. You know, I think between those two messages, we would scale up adoption so much quicker. I think the other part on low to moderate income families, and specifically like maybe multifamily residential, you know, access to EV charging is, I think by combining large scale solar PV systems with EV recharging stations connected to them, that you can provide an amenity to those people who live in multi-unit housing to recharge their vehicle, while at the same time reducing their energy burden through the solar PV production. But I think what you presented was completely compelling. We have to do more of that promotion, because, you know, if Hector owns a business on leasing electric vehicles, I mean, we just have to promote that, you know, create some campaigns around it, like Solarize, but except in a vehicle context.
No, I didn't mean to say that was Hector's business. His business is selling used vehicles, but you know, with a lot of different kinds of folks. So I'm just curious, Hector, if you had any reaction today. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to chime in.
Sure. Good afternoon. I think the perception of electrical vehicles in the lowest part of the market is that they are not effective, and they are very expensive, like you mentioned it. that they only belong for rich people, Teslas and cars like that. So I guess number one, we have to change the perception of the efficiency of the automobiles, and I think the mileage has to be improved, because if you want to go from here to Hartford on an 80-mile charge, it's going to be hard for anybody to to be able to run on that and say, I'm running into trouble if I have to go farther away to do more errands. So I guess sincerely, I think the EV vehicles, they have to improve the mileage, and again, they have to be marketed for everybody. That's
Right.
my.
So just a question about that, Hector. I think what we've heard is that there's actually, over 1,000 charging stations. So someone who's working in Hartford, for instance, probably has a charging station that's accessible, but it may not be aware. So I'm just asking questions about both of those perceptions. You see what I'm saying? The perception that you started out with, which the information establishes that people tend to perceive them as very, very expensive, and then the second one being that they're not very functional because you can't go to Hartford and back if you're a working person. So just wondering about that. Would the awareness of charging stations where you work help with the market at all?
One quick thing I'd say is that having charging at work, and let's assume that we're talking about a post-COVID world where everyone is able to, but a lot of people are still driving to work, right? But
Sure.
having charging stations at work makes employees 6 times more likely to buy an EV. That's a US DOE study. It's a meaningful incentive. And especially during the early years of the EV charging market, and ChargePoint was in the market before there were EVs on the road, we were looking towards where are going to be some of the best places where you can see interests aligned. And businesses and places of work are looking for ways to provide competitive, interesting, valuable benefits to their employees in a manner that can be net beneficial, aligned with their values, and ultimately be fairly low cost. It's a key and critical component of most people's day. And I think the real unseen value for folks as they're thinking about transitioning to electric vehicles is you charge where you park. And most of the time your vehicle's left unattended. And so by having the right tools in place, by having connected smart charging stations, you're able to ensure that there's equitable access to the chargers, that folks have visibility to where the charging stations are, and that the energy is managed in an efficient manner. So I think the interests really are quite aligned, and we're starting to see more public awareness campaigns. The Drive Clean, Drive Electric campaign, which is sponsored by NESCOM, the Northeast Air Quality Agency nonprofit association of the various states, just this past week put out a great campaign, a public awareness campaign with comedian Tom Papa. So I'll put a link to one of those in the chat. But I think we're starting to see steps in this direction, and all of that's more reinforced by some recent actions, such as the ZEV Memorandum of Understanding states committing to 100% medium and heavy duty vehicle sales by 2050. So all these pieces are in place, but you're right to point out workplace charging is just such a key component of the ecosystem.
Thank you. Yeah. So here was a question by email. What's the average miles per kilowatt hour of most EVs? And I suspect that really gets back to something that, Larry, you were talking about in terms of the cost of operation of EVs. I'll tell you a little story. For me, I'm very fortunate. I have a solarized home. And the first EV we had, we rented it for 3 years, we ran it for 18,000 miles, and I paid $2.75 to run 18,000 miles. And I was kind of pissed off I had to pay the $2.75. But it's not a bad deal. But anyway, if anybody would like to just talk about the cost here in Connecticut of running an electric vehicle, that would be great.
Yeah, there's a lot of, this is Larry, there's a lot of variables with that, including how you drive, you know, how much pressure you put on the accelerator and that sort of thing, as well as what you pay for electricity rates. So maybe one way to think about that is some simple math. If an EV that has a range of about 250 to 300 miles probably has a battery of a capacity of about 75 kilowatts. So, you know, how much electricity is required to charge that fully, and then you divide it by the number of miles. So we did that, and we came out to about 3.3 cents per mile. And we compared that to it was a Toyota, maybe it was a Toyota Camry. It was one of those, you know, that class of car. And in that case, the cost was more like 9 to 10 cents. So generally speaking, we think we're saving 60, 70, maybe even more percent of the fuel cost, whether the fuel is gas or electricity. So yeah, much less expensive in terms of actually driving them. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I guess one last question. Is there any, well, we heard from Lakiesha that the cheaper program is going to move into used vehicles for low and moderate income. And I guess we don't quite know. Bryan, I don't know if you have any sense of what range of incentives are being talked about. Do you have any sense of that?
I think the last I saw was up to $2,000 with proof of LMI status.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Larry. Yeah, this is Larry again. So I think what that was referring to is $2,000 in addition to the standard rebate. So that could be up to, I guess, theoretically $7,000 for a fuel cell vehicle, but you know, more likely in the $6,000 to $8,000 range, I think it was.
However, we're talking about used vehicles here, right? So the used vehicles do not receive a federal additional incentive. The incentive goes to the original purchaser, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We were talking about cheaper, which has a bump for LMI households.
Right.
Yeah.
So the vehicles you were showing, Curt, in terms of Carfax, that would, in this context, have some sort of $2,000 rebate on top of that, is the way I would interpret it. So that's what they're discussing, and Lakiesha mentioned that they were receiving public comments and looking at those comments.
Yeah. Okay, great.
In fact, the next meeting, I believe, is October 9th or 11th, and that's open to the public.
Great.
Yeah, so the next meeting of the cheaper board, which I think you were talking about, is next Friday at 11 a.m. And I see Bruce has asked a question about the direct sale of EVs in Connecticut. You know, and you know, without a crystal ball, all I can say is, you know, it remains uncertain how or if the General Assembly will resolve that issue. I know Tesla tried for several years battling the incumbent car dealers to allow for direct sales in Connecticut, and had been unsuccessful, although there were a few stalwart champions of Tesla in the legislature. So, you know, I guess we'll just have to sort of stay tuned and see how that plays out.
I guess one last question, which is related to milestones for meeting our targets. Charles, you've already talked about the importance of the Transportation Climate Initiative and Connecticut joining 10 other states and making that happen, which is critical. Are there any other milestones that you see that are critical for electrification, not only of our cars, but also our heavy duty, you know, vehicles that are so polluting to our neighborhoods?
Yeah, so again, following California's lead, Connecticut has joined with several states in a medium and heavy duty memorandum of understanding to address cleaning up and electrifying those classes of vehicles. I think you're absolutely right that those are critical in Connecticut, particularly as we're talking about LMI communities, overburdened communities. Electrifying the state's transit fleet is going to have huge public health benefits in addition to the very important climate reduction. So yeah, absolutely a key piece. I think the state's lead by example efforts are a little lax. I know we have very ambitious EV deployment goals for the state, but for its own fleet, the state has only targeted 50% of its fleet to be fully electrified by 2030. And there's no reason that shouldn't be 100% well before then. So we'll be working to update that, as well as looking for additional funding for the cheaper program, which was mentioned. Currently, that program is funded with $3 million a year. That comes from a car registration fee. An additional $5 million of that registration fee just goes into the general fund. And absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be used to support our ambitious electric vehicle goals moving forward. And I will point, as folks no doubt know, and I think Bruce also mentioned that in the chat, Governor Newsom in California just announced that California will be ending the sale of gasoline vehicles in its state by 2035. So I don't know if Connecticut is quite ready to take that step yet, but there's clearly some bold, big actions happening around the country in this space.
All right, well, that's fantastic. How are we doing on time? I would just, last thing I'll just say, I would encourage Hector, if you are interested, a continued conversation about whether you have any interest in sort of piloting electric vehicle sales, used electric vehicle sales, but that's for another conversation. Laura, I think I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, we are at this point over time, so I really appreciate everybody sticking around for conversation. We have been, folks have answered several of the questions in the chat. There are a couple remaining here. One, Lynn had asked earlier on about installation of chargers at malls, which, Bryan, thank you for noting that West Farms is already working on that. That is extremely cool. She had a follow-up question, which is how much does a direct current fast charger, a DCFC, which also known as a level 3 charger, about how much does one of those tend to cost? Which I wonder if that is possibly a Kevin question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it all depends on what kind of direct current fast charger you're talking about, right? Those direct current fast chargers can range from anywhere in delivering 24 kilowatts of power to up to 300, if not 500 kilowatts of power. Those costs for the equipment itself, I can refer back to a slide, or we can circulate that later on. I provided a bit of a range, and that's an industry average. Those increase, which shouldn't be too shocking, as the power increases. But then the associated piece is that all of the utility upgrades also increase. So it's important not just to think about the equipment, but what is the delivery, and then also what are the operating costs, because a business or a fleet operator, right? The closest thing we have in real life to a rational economic actor is a fleet operator who has to think about what's the least amount of money it takes to keep my vehicles on the road. They're not just looking at the upfront capital costs. They're thinking, what is the price per mile? And that's directly related to what are the electricity costs associated. So it's a bit of a complex question, but I'm happy to make sure that we circulate those slides so that y'all have a general sense.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin. Emily asks, is there a reason that it seems like it's hard to find all-wheel drive in an electric vehicle? Is that
So this is Larry. Maybe I can have a go at that.
sure?
Electric vehicles typically come with one motor or two. Some of them actually come with three motors. And the motors will work on the front wheels, like one motor will work on the front wheels, the second motor will work on the second wheels. So that's how it achieves propulsion. The software that comes with the car can sense how much energy it needs to apply to the wheels in order to have the car do what it wants to do. So sometimes that's simple, it wants to go forward. Sometimes it wants to go around a corner. So the outside wheels have to actually go faster than the inside wheels. If you're in a car that's sliding a little bit because it's wet, the wheels are going to adapt to that. So you get the benefit of four-wheel drive through software and managing the motors and the outputs of the motors separately. So you do get all-wheel drive for a two-motor car. It's just different. It's not through a limited slip differential, for example. It's through software.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Makes them safe, right? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I believe we have answered all other questions either in the chat or orally. Let's see. Last call. All right. I think we will call those well answered then. Yeah, as mentioned, we will be circulating this presentation, and we should also be able to make available presenters slides. If there are any follow-up resources that folks wanted to share, we can do that. Thank you again. Curt, are there any closing remarks you want to make before we head out?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for participating and encourage everyone to make a pledge that your next vehicle will be an electric one, especially if you're as cheap as I am. So there you go. Thank you all.
Thank you, Curt. Thank you all to all of our presenters today for making time, and to all of you for joining.